So, hello everyone, and welcome to the Code-Maven webinar. With us is Rachael Bates. Hello, Rachael.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's really nice to have you. My name is Gabor Sabo. Originally, I started this webinar series as a means of showing people how the HR people and how they are hiring. But then we sort of met online with Rachael, and when I saw that she's working as a site reliability engineer, I hope I will be able to say that word, an SRE, that's easier, at Adobe, then I thought, oh, that's really, really interesting. I would like to hear from her about her journey, about what this role means in general, especially in Adobe, and um, and then also maybe understand a little bit how not only what does she do, but also if you would like to become an SRE, then what you might need to do. Okay, so hello again, Rachael, and please introduce yourself for everyone, for me.
Yeah, great. So I've been working in the IT field for about 7 years. I initially started by going to school for a couple semesters in software engineering, but I decided to get a job doing tech support meantime and um, started to learn like the Linux command line and the operational side of things. And I found that that was actually really fun and rewarding for me. So it was a pretty natural transition for me to change my learning from becoming a software engineer to becoming a systems engineer eventually. So now I've worked as a systems engineer for about 3 years. And in the last year and a half, as Gabor said, I've been working as an SRE at Adobe. Um, and I did just want to give a shout out to Gabor.
Oh, thank you.
I did learn Perl from your website, Code-Maven. I know I told you this in private, but I just wanted to thank you again for all of your hard work and helping me get to the place where I am. And what an honor it is to be on here with you.
Yeah, that's great. Now I'm blushing. Uh, so, right. Yeah. So yeah, there is this Perl Maven website. That's the original website, and then from there the Code-Maven grew out when I decided that I would like to cover other topics as well. So what is a system engineer? I would know what is a system administrator. Is this just a different word for it? Does it cover something else?
Essentially, it's the same word. So, from my experience, the system administrator is a little bit on the lower scale of the career path. There's systems engineer, then you'll find like principal architects for like the operational side of things. So, the systems administrator is what I consider one of the first steps into becoming a systems engineer.
Okay. Okay. And why would, how does, what made you be interested in this? Why not programming? So what turned you into this direction?
Yeah, so that's a pretty good question. I, like I said, I got my start doing software engineering, but so much of it was really abstract and confusing because I didn't really have a background in IT. I came from doing a completely different career, and I saw from my friends that they had been saying that working as like a software engineer was kind of like solving puzzles all the time. And so that was intriguing to me. So I decided to take a couple classes at college, and it just clicked for me mentally. And so it was something that I was interested in delving into. But then, like I said, I got that job working tech support and begun the operational path where you learn to troubleshoot things, and it it's almost addictive
Mm.
because you get that epiphanal aha feeling when you solve an issue. And so I had a real thirst for knowledge in growing my learning so that I could almost keep feeding that addictive feeling of being the person that solves the issue.
Yeah.
And so, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, so, yeah, so that's just basically the path and how I decided to become a systems engineer.
Yeah, so yeah, it's not surprising that we call ourselves users. Like addictive and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, um, okay, so system engineer and then SRE. So why did you, was it your initiative that you would like to, that you wanted to become an SRE, or how does it happen? How did it happen?
So it actually was a very small jump for me to go from being a systems engineer to an SRE. Like I said, I had kind of a beginning with software engineering. So right from the get-go, I was already scripting and automating things that my team basically had just left around over the years. And so it was so small of a jump for me to just actually move into that role officially, because it was something that I was already doing. I mean, I was doing like the operational stuff for a long time, but I found that those tasks, as the years went on, like after the third year, became a bit repetitive. And I just found it a little bit more rewarding to delve deeper into the issues that programming offered.
So okay, so now I'm getting confused because I didn't think about SREs as anything to do with programming.
Oh,
So
well,
so now it's a good time if you explained what is an SRE, what does an SRE do?
yeah. So I consider SRE to be like a pretty dynamic title, but foundationally it has the same concepts as DevOps. So just a few minor differences though.
Okay.
Um, but traditionally, you will find SREs come from one of two backgrounds. They will either be a software engineer who's highly skilled at the command line, and then on the other hand, you'll find a systems engineer or systems administrator with a vast amount of knowledge on coding and automation. So traditionally, you will find that their tasks are kind of split up 50-50. You'll get 50% of their tasks working on the operational side of things. So these are the interrupt-driven work
Hmm.
that is traditional to a systems administrator role,
Okay.
like server down issues, hardware issues, the like. And then on the other hand, you'll spend about 50% of your time working doing automation for tasks, even adding new features for things. So it's pretty versatile. You're kind of the go-between for, I think that the real role of being an SRE is to approach operational issues from an aspect of, from the perspective of a software engineer.
Mm. Okay. Before we go on, I just remembered that I didn't tell all the people who attend now that if they have any questions, then in the chat room they can write the questions, and then we'll try to review them and see which question can we answer, or Rachel can answer actually. So go ahead, and if you have any questions about her job, about Adobe, or where can you get discount for their products or whatever, then some of these questions she might be able she might answer. Okay, so just go ahead and write in the chat. So can you describe? So okay, so I understand a part of the work is like a sys administrator, uh, basically running after and trying to fix things that get broken, right? And the other part is understanding the code, writing more code for automation, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So what kind of things um, are specific, let's say. I don't know what can you say about Adobe. So obviously there are limitations that can be publicly said, but whatever you can share, that what is a day of your job, a day on your job looks like. So how does it look like?
Yeah. So I think that on a day-to-day basis, my job can vary quite a bit. Much of our work will come up last minute. Like we don't work in sprints like the engineering teams traditionally do. Like we have sprints, but it's a very, very loose term.
Mhm.
So, but if another team needs assistance, we're the first ones to jump in, drop what we're doing, and facilitate their needs to get their job done. So, a lot of the times we will, um, like right now, I'm working with an engineering team to help them get new services online. So, I give them advice for best practices from an operational side of things. And um, I also try to help them streamline their pipeline so that everything's fully automated. Because sometimes you'll get engineers who are like, why can't I just install all this stuff just onto a single server and I'll just build it up manually every time that we need this cluster? And that's a no-go. We always want things to have resiliency in case of disaster recovery, those sort of things. And those are things that software engineers aren't traditionally thinking about, but that we're trying to bring in that perspective for them.
So
Oh, sorry.
okay, so if when an engineer, when a developer, okay, when one of the developer teams want to do some kind of a research work, trying to build some new product, sorry, new service, that is definitely not yet. Sorry, I have to drink.
Fine, you're just fine.
Okay, sorry for that. I hope that my voice comes back now. Okay, so um, a development team or a single developer tries to build a new application, and at this point, the application is more of a research. So the person doesn't really think about the production aspects. It might not go into the production at one point. So for them, it seems like a huge waste of time investing in the automation part, so it will be production ready, if it even works, right? Because they think that this might not work. So at what point and how do you convince them that no, you need to think about deployment as well?
Yeah, so if it's a one-off type of platform, we can be lenient towards how we need to automate things. Generally, we will always automate the baseline. So we go through the same process of like OSing the server and getting the same base packages installed on servers, those sort of things that ensure the security of the server. And if it is a one-off, we, like I said, are lenient, but we expect that server to basically be torn down after the engineer is done with what they're doing. If they plan on keeping that server long term, then they need to think about automating it long term, because we do not want to create snowflakes. This has been actually a huge problem as we're upgrading a lot of our server, not a lot, we're upgrading all of our servers from CentOS 6 to CentOS 7. And so there are so many snowflakes that were created, 15, 20 years ago that we're still working through right now, because they're such fragile systems. People don't know everything that's running on them. And there's no documentation for it. So at all costs, we will try to avoid that unless it is on the very short term.
Right. Um, there is this question now, do you miss software engineering and building a product from start to finish, or going deep into issues like compilation bugs or weird software bugs?
I would say building products from start to finish. I feel like that's the most rewarding part. I think that when you're building things, bugs will come up naturally. And so I do get that really rewarding feeling of debugging issues. But again, I always like to see this brand new compiled code of something that I built working and helping people.
Yeah, I think it's a different, it's a slightly different mode of work. So I also feel that I tend more into the direction of uh, pipelines and helping people. So this area, I normally call, these days I call it DevOps because that's the buzzword for it, or that's the word for it.
Yeah.
But and not so much a software engineer. So it's a different, slightly different mindset. I think it's more, it's wider. So you help a lot more projects. You have your impact on a lot more things than a software developer who might go from the beginning to the end. Is it? But it's in a narrower path, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's so much diversity for topics that we have to cover that it's almost overwhelming. Like, I've been working at Adobe for about a year and a half, and I would say I am moderately trained in a lot of the technologies that they use. Just because there's so many, it's hard to be a master of all of them. So you have to be a very versatile person and willing to learn and get out of your comfort zone.
So what are the main technologies that you use?
Yeah, we use so many.
Like, do you use Docker and um, and
Yeah,
that area, that stack, or virtual machines, or what is the usual setup?
yeah. So we definitely use Docker. We use that for primarily, we do use it for building servers and applications on the fly, like with Kubernetes and such. But we also use it for testing our code, just like on our personal work computers. We spin up the Docker image and we run our code to basically mimic testing it in a dev and production environment to see if there's any errors. So that's pretty helpful. Um, we use a lot of storage solutions like SAN, NFS, RAID, hardware RAID, software RAID. Load balancer management. So we use Avi and F5s. We're trying to migrate off of F5s over to Avi. It's just a little bit more versatile and flexible. We use Kafka for streaming in data that we collect from customers' websites.
Mhm.
And we use Hadoop to process all of that data. And then we just have this extremely huge and custom pipeline for how we take steps further for processing data. And then we have like more standard tools like Artifactory and Jenkins. And on the side of like systems engineering, we also have our configuration management tools like Salt, Puppet, Ansible, just the standard stuff there. So you have to know a lot of stuff.
Right. So how do you get started with it, or at what point? So okay, this is standard job thing that I see on a job um, offer or whatever, that we are looking for someone, and then they list all of these technologies, and I
Right.
don't think that anyone knows all of these at a high level. So
That's the perfect point. There is no employee who's going to be 100% qualified for a position, and companies are completely aware of that when you're applying for jobs. If you have experience with something similar that will help you with learning something more quickly, then that's a really good factor for helping you to get that job, I think. So for example, at my previous company I worked at, I had some Ceph experience, which is just crazy and abstract. But I feel like that's helped me to understand Hadoop and how it works with its storage a lot easier. So it also, I think, showed that I had a willingness to learn and the capability of learning while on the job. So it's important to not feel like you can't get the job that you're not qualified for, because again, all of these things were listed on the job posting for an SRE at Adobe, and I definitely wasn't trained in Kafka and Hadoop before I started working here. But as time goes on, I gained experience from it, I learned from my teammates, and it's been a challenge at times, but it's also been really rewarding, and I know it will help me even more in the future.
So where do you put yourself when you say, when you saw the job listing, and then you said, okay, well, I know 70% of these things, and I'm okay with it, or did you think about this, that okay, I'm okay. So how did you feel that it's possible for you even to apply? I mean, many people I know, I mean, I can apply to jobs that half of the things, or tasks that I don't know half of them, because I know that I can learn them, or I trust myself that I can learn them. Many people, on the other hand, feel that if they don't fit the 100%, then they won't apply. So how was it for you?
It didn't actually really concern me too much that I wasn't perfectly qualified, because I trusted my experience. I really wasn't sure that I would even get the job. I thought that in my life at that point that I was ready to kind of change tactics and do more focus on the software engineering side of things. But you know, I wasn't really scared to not know everything. And I think that in essence, being comfortable in my skin probably helped me get the job a little bit easier, just because people could see that I was comfortable with pushing myself past my comfort zone.
Hmm. That's a good point. And so how did you decide that Adobe is for you, or so not SRE, being SRE, Adobe specifically? Like, it's a huge company, right? How many employees are there? Do you
Um,
know?
like over 20,000 employees
Wow.
worldwide. So
Okay.
it's a very large company. They opened an office back in 2009 here in Utah. And my brother-in-law actually worked for them. And this may sound cheesy, but I always really looked up to him. And I feel like he made it. You know, I could see very clearly the benefits that he was getting from working at Adobe. And as a young child, I was like, that was something that I always really wanted for myself. And so I kind of put Adobe on a pedestal, and I was like, maybe someday I can obtain that. But I suffer from imposter syndrome. And so I didn't really think it was possible, even when I was applying for the job,
Mhm.
to actually get the job. So I was really surprised when I got the call back for that. But yeah, I really feel like, though, having worked here, that I can see firsthand how invested Adobe is in their employees, and even better, how that gets reciprocated like tenfold from the employees. I see that everybody is so invested in the company and its success. And I think that makes a real difference in the culture and the environment.
How does it work now, that with all the virus and being, I don't know, are you working from home? So earlier, I guess you worked from the office, right?
That's
How's it
correct.
now?
So I was in the office full time. We on our team, we do have a couple people who are full-time remote, but for me and about 12 others, we would go into the office daily. And with the pandemic, there was a bit of a learning curve at first where we couldn't just do the shoulder taps and say, hey, can you help me with this? But we've been getting better at jumping onto video calls, just on Slack. Even if a conversation's lasting longer than 5 minutes over Slack, we're just like, hey, let's actually just talk about this. And so we'll jump onto a call, and that makes it a lot easier. We have some whiteboarding methods that we use. So a lot of it is mimicked as though we were in the office doing our normal meetings. And of course, like with our team, like we have weekly meetings with them, and we still do like our daily stand-ups with each other. So we're very much involved in each other's lives still. So again, with the learning curve, it kind of sucked at first, but it's gotten a lot better. And I think everybody's found their flow for now.
Yeah, well, the biggest issue, and I'm surprised that you had a team where some people were remote and it was functioning, because that's sort of, as I understand, the hardest. So if everyone is on site, that's working. If everyone is remote, that's working. But if some people are remote, that's probably the hardest, because those people who are on site, they have their own communication channels because they see each other, and then the others are left out. How is it solved?
Yeah, I think that the people who work remote full time, they honestly were always online. And so you could always feel their presence because they were always involved in pretty much everything, especially like this one employee. He's one of the star employees, but he never stops working. And so maybe that is also a problem, that he's always online. And I know that there's some people who have struggled with that transition on our team now that everybody's working full time remotely. But um, I don't feel like they ever missed out on the in-office banter, because again, we were almost trained pre-pandemic to just jump onto calls with these people who were fully remote if conversations were lasting longer than a normal chat. So it was pretty easy for us to come together like that.
How do you handle the maintenance of information, of the spreading of information among the team members? So you have a chat with someone, or even better, if you have a conversation, like a Skype or Zoom or whatever, and then everyone else all the other people are left out from this conversation, and whatever you um, decision you reached, or the reasons you reached the decision. How do you
Yeah,
manage the communication of this?
that's a good question. We have team meetings where we have like an open table sort of scenario. Everybody gets their own chance to talk about highlights for their week, things that are of concern to them. And of course, we always have like our team channel in Slack where we can just say, hey, what do you guys think about this? And very frequently, we will have full discussions in there concerning topics that concern everybody. And so I don't feel like there's been any lack in that sort of conversation, where normally in the office you could just eavesdrop to find out what people were talking about. But I think that communication has actually gotten better since the working from home situation
Yeah,
started.
I told you, right, that when everyone is remote, then it's better,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so yeah, because so it's interesting, because that's what I've heard from people who talk about these remote work and versus non-remote work. People who talked about it earlier, even before the pandemic, that this is the main issue when some people are remote. Um, so back to the point where you were learning, where you were preparing to work for Adobe. Did you do any special learning so you will be better prepared for the job interview or even before when you applied? So you learned on the job on your previous jobs, of course, stuff, but have you invested any extra time, energy in learning something?
Yeah, I did. So I basically went and I saw that they wanted Python like really strongly. So I began learning Python. And so I was very much beginner when I went into the interview. And I told them that. And I actually didn't even get tested for Python just because I was in the learning process. They told me like for my code writing exercises that I could use any language. So that made me more comfortable, but I was prepared to show them what I did know of Python so far. Um, but I guess they just trusted that I would learn. And other things that I did was I really practiced interview questions in advance, just standard software engineering questions, because I had been in system admin interviews in the past. So I knew what that experience would look like, but I didn't know what it looked like from a software engineer aspect. So I researched pretty heavily for what I could expect for like programming scenarios, questions that would be asked of me. And I actually think that that helped a lot. Otherwise, I don't think I would have been prepared fully. And kind of the last thing that I looked into was actually just reading about the company itself. So anything recent about the company and its news, I learned about the CEO. Anything that I could show how invested I was and knowledgeable about the company, just to show that I would be a good fit.
Hmm. Yeah, this investment I think is many people lack this kind of investment. People send out CVs to thousand companies, the same CV, and then they are surprised that none of them really respond.
Yeah, I really agree that that can be a problem. I think that if you're truly invested in working in one company, that doing your research into it will show and will definitely help you get a job with them. Because I was prepared, and I know that we talked about this in private, but I was prepared to keep reapplying with Adobe because I was so determined to get this job. Like that was the job that I needed in my life. And so it it was maybe a little obsessive, but at the same time, it obviously helped.
Right. Yeah. Um, so uh, you say that they are asked for Python. So you're writing mainly when you're programming these days. When you write programs, you're writing mainly in Python, or do you use other languages? What kind of languages do you use?
Yeah, so primarily writing in Python. On the operational side of things, like I do have to know Bash, but Python is definitely where I think like the industry in general is shifting towards. So in the past, you would see a lot more Perl, in my opinion, but everybody's migrating towards Python, and that's a lot of my work right now is actually migrating scripts that were on CentOS 6 and written in Perl that are no longer functioning on CentOS 7. So I'm updating those to be Python because you're not finding as many people who know Perl nowadays. And so it's kind of work that has to go to a select few. But yeah, just
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing this all over actually. So it's not even there anymore. I mean, most people don't even talk about Perl, unfortunately, or whatever. Um, and Python is like really huge in this area. You mentioned Jenkins. So, for example, do you write the Jenkins scripts as well? And if yes, then are there those also in Python or?
so I actually don't write those. Team members do. I just haven't gotten the experience with it yet. I do know that they are written in Python and some in Jinja, I believe.
I don't know. I mean, Jenkins, you can use basically in Jenkins built-in stuff, but I personally prefer to move everything to let's say Python or some external language, so I won't depend anything on Jenkins. So my automation things could be executed without Jenkins as well. That's actually what the way I look at this usually.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I just don't have a ton of experience with that. I'm kind of a user at this point, but I know that a lot of my team members are involved with it.
Mm-hmm. So if I would like to become a, I don't know what to ask, Adobe engineer or an SRE engineer, an Adobe employee or an SRE employee, an SRE. Let's go for the SRE part. Uh, what do you think that the most that I should do, or what kind of things should I learn on my spare time, or I don't know.
So I think that learning how to do systems engineering is pretty crucial. But then I came from that background. And so, but I think that that really helps with on-call issues. So again, the on-call issues are the interrupt-driven work, which is pretty much 98% of the time operational things. And so these are generally issues that need to be addressed in a timely manner. Otherwise, you're going to see downtime getting affected, customers getting affected. So there's a real pressure to resolve these issues quickly, but also very carefully so that you don't injure your system further. So you always have to be very mindful of what you're doing. So learning the command line, learning basic bash usage, will be exceptionally helpful for when you get those middle of the night calls where you're groggy, just trying to roll out of bed and the world is crashing down. I'm just kidding, it's not that bad. But on the other hand, I think just basic programming, best practices, learning one language, I would suggest Python, like I said, that's becoming the industry standard right now. Would be your best foot forward. I think that knowing other technologies, like some that I listed off, so you'll always be working with storage technologies like RAID and SAN and NFS. So having basic understandings of those would be really helpful. And honestly, there's a lot of people who kind of just specialize. So if you like working like in security, we have members of our team that only really focus on security. They don't really have any hardware or operational experience whatsoever, but they're exceptionally good at what they do. So you just have to find your niche, what interests you, and go for that. Like work and build on your own strengths.
So you mentioned midnight calls or calls at sometimes. Are you on call sometimes? Do you have to be on call, or how is your work schedule? And how do you
Yeah,
handle these kind of situations of?
yeah, so it's kind of a little bit of a grueling schedule compared to my last job, at least for the on-call. So we have a rotational on-call where it's 1 week on, almost 2 months off because our team's larger now. Um, and you cover interruptive issues throughout the day and the night. So say, for example, you're up all night working on some issue that's cropped up and it could have taken 8 hours or whatever to fix it. That's not the norm, but this has happened. Where you're working so long, but then at Adobe, they also have like kind of this Slack channel where people can come in with their requests to the on-call person. Again, we want interrupt-driven work, to be coming into the person who's on call, so they're prepared to keep working on these tasks, whereas people who are working more on their longer project work aren't getting pulled out of their generally deep focus type of work. So I just have found that it's easier to have all the issues come into the on-call. But again, the only problem is you're on day and night right now versus getting some relief during the day a little bit more. I mean, your teammates will be understanding. So if you reach out to them and say, hey, can you cover for a couple of hours? I'm exhausted, they'll do it. But you do have to take that initiative and really communicate with your team where you're at if those sort of things happen.
Don't you have offices around the world that could handle, like everyone could handle stuff during their daytime?
We do, and the problem is that the team of SREs that are on the other in other countries around the world, they aren't trained in everything that my team is trained for, and so it's a problem of cross-team training. Technically, they are SREs, but they focus on different platforms than we do. So there does need to be better sharing of knowledge, but we're still working on like kind of a documentation overhaul. There's fairly good documentation so that people can pretty much self-help when certain issues come up. But as we are upgrading, especially from CentOS 6 to CentOS 7, a lot of that documentation is becoming out of date. And so only some people know like the true fixes for things. And so we end up having to reach out to them if we can't solve it on our own. And eventually we will use a follow the sun model. And we are working towards that. But right now it's just not there yet.
And when you work at night, because some other person wakes you up, or you're awake and looking at the lights on your computer, and when something becomes red, then you start to go, or how do you know that you have to do something urgently?
Yeah, so there's a couple different methods. We have some automated alerts where they will send pages directly to our phones. And so when I'm on call, I leave all of my alerts on, like I don't turn on my do not disturb that I normally have. And so you'll get alerts into your phone. You'll get phone calls from people who are online throughout the night. So these are our monitoring engineers who are actually physically monitoring alerts. And if they can't resolve the alerts that we generally will have a checklist for, if they go through all the items and they're still not able to resolve it, then the escalation means path from there means that they'll contact us. So we'll receive calls from them. So those are usually the two methods.
And then when they wake you up, then is it you alone, or the person who's on call that night, or then a couple of people start working on something?
So if you're
Like, are you alone in the dark? And
so kind of, I mean, you're not fully alone because if you're the primary person on call, then you are expected to try to resolve as many issues as you can on your own. But again, like I'm new on the team, and people understand that I don't know everything about every system that we have. And so it's okay to reach out to people who are more knowledgeable about these sort of issues. And so I've only had to make those calls a couple of times. And of course you feel bad about waking other people up. But again, it comes down to the importance of maintaining uptime and reliability so that customers trust us. That's very important. And so basically you have to come to terms with being woken up at odd hours, even if you're not on call.
do you use something like Chaos Monkey to turn things off when you during the day, so you see that how your system is resilient and how your personal procedures work?
So I'm not really sure what that is, but we use like Nagios monitoring.
No. So okay, sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay, so the Chaos Monkeys, I think Netflix something, or I don't know that the application just goes and turns off various systems, um, randomly to see if the alerts go out as expected, and if people know how to recover from some disaster that was caused on purpose, basically.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. All of our alerts are pretty much so we have a very special configuration where we set up a new service essentially. So what I consider a service would be a specific cluster of servers that are providing a single application or function to the rest of the platform. And so when we set up this service, we expect the people who are building it to know what needs to be monitored. So we will always add standard Linux server monitoring. So like uptime, checking for disk space, those sort of things. But then we work with, so this is actually a task that SREs should be doing, is that we need to be working directly with the engineering team to set up health checks for any applications that are running and test them very thoroughly before any servers get put into production. So there's that sort of system, and we do, again, a lot of robust training and testing, and put documentation beforehand before any of these servers are put into production.
Right. Good. I think I ran out of questions, more or less. Do you think, were there any issues that we wanted to cover, or that you wanted to cover, that you wanted to talk about, that I have?
No, I think that we covered everything pretty thoroughly. I don't really have anything else.
Okay, that's great. Anyone in the audience, if you still have a question, that's the last. You have the last few seconds to type in your questions, and so if people have questions to you about your role, how can they reach you?
My LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to reach out to me, and I check it quite frequently, so that's really easy. So it's Rachael M. Bates on LinkedIn.
I'll link to it.
Perfect. And I'm happy to help people along their path to an SRE. I can even do fake interviews with them, do resume reviews, that sort of thing, and also give you any learning tools that I've used in the past that I found helpful. So feel free to reach out to me at any time.
I will definitely going to ask you about these tools, and then maybe we'll link them on the website of the video. Okay. So thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much for coming to this webinar, and thank you everyone for joining us and listening to us.
Thank you for
the
having
video
me.
is sorry.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so the video is going to be on YouTube, and hope to see you soon on one of the other webinars. So thank you very much again. Bye bye.